Hello and welcome to the Exam Study Expert podcast and to our final instalment in the Flashcard Mastery course. Flashcards are a super powerful learning tool and very popular with lots of our listeners for good reason because they work really well. But there is a lot of detail when it comes to getting the most out of your flashcard learning. I'd highly recommend going back and listening to this course in order. So if you haven't already, do catch up on parts 1, 2, 3 and 4A before continuing with today's final instalment, part 4B. We've previously covered ideas like where flashcards fit in your overall learning system, the fundamentals of how to use them, top tips and tricks for making or writing really good flashcards, how to balance your flashcard writing time with the all-important process of testing your flashcards. And to cap things off today, we have 6 top tips to elevate that most critical part of your flashcard learning, how to actually go about testing yourself on the cards, or training with them as I like to call it. So when I talk about flashcard training, I mean the process of sitting, looking at the question or cue on one side and trying to remember the answer on the back, or equivalent in a digital flashcard tool. The reason I say I've been emphasising listening to things in order is because there'll be things that we talk about today that kind of assume prior knowledge that we've already talked about in previous instalments. So well worth listening through everything. If you're an experienced flashcard user, chances are a fair chunk of what we talk about, particularly in the early parts of this course, are things you already do, which is great. But it's really important to capture everything. And if you're kind of missing one of the 5 things, you do 4 of them really well, but there's kind of a 5th thing that, that's actually not how I do it, then it's really important to kind of internalize that and make sure all the bricks in the first layer of the pyramid, so to speak, are aligned and kind of in place. Because if we've got kind of a key foundation stone missing, then the whole thing it doesn't kind of work as well. And the kind of more advanced tips that we're talking about today for testing your cards won't sort of be as relevant if there's kind of fundamentals that aren't quite in place yet. So, really important episode today. And as throughout this course, I'm sharing some of my house secrets today. So ideas born from literally thousands and thousands of hours of in-depth one-on-one coaching with hundreds of ambitious flashcard users preparing for all kinds of exams, going really deep with them to help improve their results with their flashcards, applying the science and really kind of making the practical element work and master the implementation so that they can learn as much as possible in the most time-efficient way. And I'm giving away an awful lot of kind of my house secrets to you at no charge as part of this Flashcard Mastery course. And the reason I'm doing that is because I know that many of you will go on to become good clients, good coaching clients in the future. Or perhaps if you're at school listening, you'll bring me on board to work with you and your students and help them with their learning. And while other listeners will consider supporting the work we do here on the Exam Study Expert podcast through our new Patreon, which comes with a whole range of benefits and content upgrades to you. So if you'd like to find out more about working directly with me as your exam success coach, head to examstudyexpert.com/coaching or to join our VIP supporters club on Patreon. It's examstudyexpert.com/VIP. I appreciate you all and look forward to serving you further. And with that, let's dive right into our 6 big ideas today to help master your flashcard testing. Idea number 1, don't put your memory out of order. So for many kinds of academic learning, your flashcards will form a sequence of some kind. You're working through the relevant areas of a topic in order that has logic and flow to it, like a story. It's commonly taught in flashcard technique that we use different piles for right cards or wrong cards. And so by doing that, you sort of jumble up the flashcards and the order gets all scrambled. And they're all just kind of loose and floating around and, referring back to the original order you wrote the cards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you might end up testing them in the order kind of 3, 5, 7, 9, 8, 1, and it's just all kind of completely scrambled up. So this is how many kind of flashcard systems are taught when it comes to training. For example, if you're familiar with the Lightner box system, that is built on the idea of effectively scrambling up your cards, jumbling them up around, you're working through different cards at different times and it all just kind of loses its order. in practice, I have long experience has taught me that is often unhelpful, and it's for the reason I kind of introduced this section with that idea that when you're writing your cards, whether it's a topic in sort of science or medicine or engineering, or whether it's a kind of set of details in a subject like history or business studies or economics, there is that idea of sequence, that idea of story, that idea of logic, flow. The earlier cards introduce kind of concepts that are then built on and expanded, or things that happen subsequently as you go through. And there's this idea in psychology of the schema, the knowledge schema. This is our kind of web of understanding of the topic. You can think of this as like a picture, like a giant kind of network of nodes. Each node is kind of an individual fact or concept. And then we want to kind of join up all the nodes to make this big kind of interconnected web of understanding. And I find that schema is built much more easily if we are able to test our cards in order, anytime there is some kind of story or logic to the individual points. Even though you don't have kind of any explicit, it's not like you're drawing out a mind map or something where you're kind of connecting the dots explicitly. Just by the fact of you're testing the cards in order, that naturally helps you to learn the order the cards go in and kind of associate them, and allows your brain to more easily connect the dots and kind of build that rich understanding of how the different ideas fit together, rather than learning just these isolated little chunks kind of in isolation and not really understanding how the big picture fits together. Now, there are exceptions to this, when I don't mind if you want to test your cards all scrambled and out of order. And a good example of this is learning vocabulary. So often when we're learning foreign language vocabulary, it is actually strongly desirable to scramble it all up, because you'll need to be able to recognize words out of context in all kinds of different sentence structures, and be able to kind of produce that in your own speaking and writing, in which case I would actively advise you to scramble up the cards for better learning. However, as I say, in most cases, probably a good idea to consider keeping your cards in order. And I find that's generally the case, generally the best option for kind of the majority of cases I see in my coaching. So to put this idea into practice, we also need a way to make sure we can come back to cards if we struggle with them. So if we're not using different piles for cards we got right or cards we got wrong, and we're keeping our cards in order, we're going to need a way to loop back on cards later, mark out the ones we struggle with. I'll talk about that in the next idea in just a moment. So if we want to keep our cards in order, as I suggest, we've got a few options. We can either use a band, an elastic band, or a clip, bulldog clip or something to keep loose paper cards in order. Or we can choose to purchase paper flashcards that already come spiral bound. Or if we're using a digital flashcard platform, we can look for the test in order mode that many digital flashcard platforms now offer. This is rarely the default. It's often an optional setting. And if you are a member of our VIP Supporters Club on Patreon, access to a set of deep dive walkthroughs on how to use the various digital flashcard apps. We've got the big three covered. We've got one walkthrough for Brainscape, one for Quizlet, one for Anki. Those are the main three that we see most of our listeners using. And my associate, Dr. Alex Sybil, recorded a detailed deep dive walkthrough of how we suggest getting the most out of each of those platforms. And she sort of screen shares and walks you through how to get the most out of it. So that's a really useful resource there on the Patreon if you are using any of those tools. I've also uploaded my flashcard walkthrough. So when I was revising for my big exams at university, I was a heavy flashcard user, and I've done a nice walkthrough of how I went about the flashcard testing process and how I went about the learning, just kind of giving you a nice worked example of how it all fitted together in practice. A worked example, a case study applying a lot of the ideas that are in this course. So that will be a nice resource to look at if you're using paper flashcards. Again, that's all in the Patreon VIP Supporters Club. You can find out more about that at examstudyexpert.com/VIP. So, second idea for today. If at first you don't succeed, how do we loop back on those cards if we don't get them right at first? This is really important. So if we found a card difficult, we've got it wrong, we struggled with it, we want to be able to practice again. Now, depending on how difficult that card was, we might even want to just try it again immediately. Maybe repeating that cycle of recall attempt, check the answer, recall attempt, check the answer, multiple times, 2, 3, 4, 5 times possibly, until we get the answer entirely correct, particularly if it's quite an involved answer on the reverse of that card. Then we maybe try one or two more cards and then come back and revisit that tricky card again. And the reason I say do it again straight away is, you will never stand a better chance of being able to recall it accurately and get that first round of spaced retrieval practice in so much as immediately, straight away. And a really nice example of why we might want to consider doing this is, I remember talking to a gentleman recently who's preparing for some exams. He was using the pile system, by the way, so he's putting flashcards in a different pile if he got them wrong. And he was testing all his cards every day. But he was basically finding that he was putting cards in the wrong pile and then coming back to them again tomorrow, and that wrong pile just wasn't going down. Like, it was 24 hours later and he still couldn't remember the he'd looked at the right answer the previous day, but 24 hours later he'd forgotten what the answer was. So that pile of cards he'd never got right wasn't going down at all. So my suggestion to him was apply this idea. So if you get a card wrong, just try it again straight away. Get that first round of spaced retrieval practice in, like, basically immediately with no delay. And even if even that doesn't work, then have another go at it. A couple more times if necessary, and then we can start to ramp up the time intervals. If we're not using the pile system, if we're not using a right or wrong pile, then how do we mark out the cards that we want to come back to? It's important to, come back to the cards, at the end of our practice or the following day, in addition to coming back to them straight away. If we've struggled with them, if we've got them wrong, how do we know which ones we need to come back and revisit if we've struggled with them? So rather than using piles, you might consider one of the following methods to mark out the cards you got wrong. So you could either dog ear or turn the corner over on a flashcard that you got wrong, or put a pencil mark of some kind on the front, maybe a little tick box or a star or something. Or you could possibly add a paperclip to the card. So keep like a little jar of paper clips, and each card that you got wrong and want to have another go at, put a paper clip on it. And then once you've got it right, you can take the paper clip off. Again, for digital flashcard users, if you're using a digital flashcard tool, Quizlet, Anki, Brainscape, etc., and the algorithm doesn't give you the reattempts that you want when you want them, you could try simply favoriting the cards you want to practice again. Tip number 3, building on this idea of how to get the most out of digital flashcard tools, you are allowed to ignore the algorithm. So if you're using a digital flashcard tool, it will have its own ideas about when to test the cards, the built-in spaced repetition algorithm. And sometimes this can be very helpful, particularly if you're new to the idea of spaced repetition. You don't need to worry about your own spacing system. You just do what the algorithm tells you. It holds your hand, you log into your app each day, and the cards are there waiting for you, ready to be tested. And again, works really nicely if you want a bit of hand-holding, if you're new to it, and particularly when you've kind of got a relatively low volume of cards, you haven't got too many in there, that can work really, really well. There are some drawbacks to using the algorithm as it's built, though. As we mentioned in, I think this was back in part 3, there can be forgive me, part 4A, so it's last week's episode. And as we talked about, there's sometimes a perverse disincentive to start testing your cards. So once a card is tested for the first time, it kind of drops into the spaced repetition algorithm, and the system starts effectively kind of nagging you, telling you to test that card again and again and again per the spaced repetition schedule. It doesn't start doing that until you've tested it for the first time. So some people find they're kind of subtly incentivized to write cards but not test them for the first time, so that the system doesn't start telling them to test and retest, which can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming. I also sometimes find that the algorithm can break down at scale when learning very large courses, and it may not handle inconsistency very gracefully. So if you're skipping, perhaps you've lost a couple of weeks due to an illness or holiday, or had some clients last year that were affected by some of the massive storms that hit America. If something's happened, the algorithm like that, and you've kind of lost a kind of significant chunk of time, again, the algorithm may kind of not have handled that as would be optimal. So as I say, by all means use the algorithm if it's working for you. Sensible thought and good spaced repetition science has gone into designing it, but it is ultimately a one-size-fits-all system. So if for any of the above reasons the default settings aren't working for you, don't be afraid to adjust, play around, do your own thing. Number 4, realistic recall rehearsal. So whether you're using a digital tool or paper flashcards, a really nice thing to think about is testing yourself, doing the recall in the modality of the final test. Okay, so what format will your final test be in? Is it written, spoken? Train accordingly for at least some of your flashcard testing time. Doesn't have to be all of it, but I recommend it being at least some of it. So 3 big examples. If you've got a handwritten test paper, make sure you're practicing writing your responses by hand. Don't only do them in your head or type them into your answer box in Anki. Actually write out the answers with a pen, like you'll be doing on exam day, getting the feel for the words, the equations, and especially any diagrams under your pen. Number 2, if you're responding via a laptop, which is an accommodation that is often offered to neurodivergent scholars, as well as being the default for many kind of remote taken or kind of professional exams. Often you kind of type in your answers into the answer box these days. Then again, you want to practice typing your answers just as you'll be doing on the day. So, practice typing your answers into the answer box if you're using a digital tool, or even if you've got a stack of paper flashcards, have like a Word doc open and be practicing kind of typing your answers as you recall them. And then final one, if you're responding verbally, so you're preparing for a Viva or oral or speaking examination, or you've got an accommodation where you're dictating your answers to a scribe in the exam who'll be writing them out for you, then again, practice speaking the answers out loud. To practice speaking fluently, even when feeling the pressure of being on the spot, try recording your answers into the voice notes app on your phone. So just having that little recording going can help kind of simulate what it feels like to be kind of in an exam or kind of dictating to someone else a little bit more than just speaking to an empty room. You don't even have to listen to the recording back. Just kind of having that sensation that a recording is going changes the kind of mindset of how you're speaking and kind of makes it just that little bit more realistic. It's a nice little trick. In some cases, practicing in the same format as the exam can add quite a bit of extra challenge, making the testing feel more difficult. But the more challenging it's feeling, the more important this kind of practice is to do, because you're ultimately going to need to be able to do that on exam day. Maybe you don't start with that on day one. Maybe you build up to it gradually. So, for example, if you've got kind of a lot of lists to learn, for a complex set of medical information for a kind of medical vet med exam, you might start practicing by hand. It's often easier to remember a list by hand, and then build up to being able to do it speaking as you'll be in an oral exam to your examiner on the day. So you start handwritten and then build up to being able to speak them out. So final little bonus idea for this one, consider whether you need to know the information both ways. In other words, whether it makes sense to train in both directions, front to back and back to front. So vocabulary is a classic example of this. You might want to practice your flashcards both ways round, being able to recall the French word from the English and then the English word from the French, and be able to practice both ways round. You may not need both ways round. So if it's just a reading or listening exam where you'll just be going from French to English, then you only need to practice in one direction. Similarly, if it's a writing or speaking exam, then you only really need to practice from English into French or whatever other language you're doing. But if your exam will be exploring multiple modalities and you'll need to be able to translate from your language into the other and back again, then you'll need to practice your cards both ways round. Idea number 5, if at first you don't succeed. So this one is all about when you get those stubborn cards that you keep going and going and going. And we talked earlier about that kind of idea of drilling your cards, recall, check the answer, try to recall, check the answer, try to recall, check the answer. Let's say you've done that kind of 2-3 times and you're still getting bits wrong, and it's maybe quite an involved, quite difficult card. It's a long list or a very involved complex equation or diagram or something, and you're just kind of stuck on trying to make progress with it. There are a few things we can do at that point. So one is breaking the recall up. Okay, so you might just, again, going back to the idea of a list or even an equation, you might just practice the first half of it and then the second half of it and then put it all together. So, you practice the first 4 of the 8 items on the list and try and get those, or you practice what's on the kind of the top of the equation and try and write that out. And then you practice the second half and do that in isolation. And then you try putting the whole thing back together. Another idea is mnemonic strategies. So again, we talk about this a bit more in the over on the Exam Study Expert Patreon. If you're looking to make an acronym, if you're looking to memorize, again, a good example of this is memorizing a set of items in a list. You might consider making an acronym from the first letters of the keywords of each item. And final option here is writing the answer down. So we talked about testing in the format of the exam, but if you're, again, we'll use that example where you're preparing for a speaking exam. if you've got a lot of lists to learn, you might find it easier to sort of practice writing your lists out at first and then build up to doing the speaking. Because when you write the answer down, it's a little bit easier because it allows you to remember it piece by piece and build up the answer gradually. All of these ideas, by the way, whether we're breaking up, doing a piece at a time, whether we're using a mnemonic strategy, whether we're writing the answer down, all of these are slightly different ways to sort of hack or make the most of our limitations of our working memory capacity. So they're solutions to our natural limitation in working memory capacity, as we talked about back in part 1 of this course. Final point I'd make here. So when we're struggling with cards, there comes a point, I think, where we may need to cut our losses. Don't persevere indefinitely under the understanding that your time is limited. Almost everybody I ever talk to is working with limited time. So we have a limited budget of time to invest. There will come a point where we just sometimes on a particular detail of our course, it makes sense just to cut our losses to make sure that we have coverage of the rest of our course. So, I know that's often a hard thing to do in the moment. I know you want to perfect every last detail of your course. That may not always be realistic if you have a very extensive, very advanced, very detailed course to cover and your time relative to the amount of work to do is very limited. So there comes a point where that incremental progress becomes increasingly difficult. You may find you're having to invest more and more time to learn fewer and fewer new points. So we do need to find a balance between your drive to master every single detail of every single topic and the need to give yourself some decent coverage of all topic areas of your course before the exam. So we don't want to fall into the trap, for example, of knowing 100% of the details of only half our course, and then we've run out of time to look at the other half of the course and we're on like 0% understanding of the other half of the course. It's better to kind of have, like 80%, 90% coverage of 100% of your course topics, rather than only know half of it to kind of 100% detail and not know the other half at all, as I'm sure you'd agree. So sometimes we just need to settle for good enough to ensure that you get through the whole course in time. My sixth and final idea today is about getting social, pair testing. So flashcards and their variants that we've talked about in previous installments in this course, so things like smart notes, are a great resource to use for pair testing. So they're fantastic to use on their own, of course. You use on your own, of course. You can sit and test yourself, and that's what we've kind of been describing throughout this episode so far. But we can also hand that stack of flashcards or hand over those smart notes to a friend, peer, colleague, family member, mum, dad, brother, sister, guardian, whatever. Your testing partner doesn't even need to have any subject knowledge because you've already highlighted the right questions or right cues to be presenting, and you've provided the corresponding answer in the flashcards. This often is a nice way to add a little bit of variety, add a little bit of engagement. And some students I know, all the way through to kind of the end of high school, so sort of 17, 18 years old, really like to just kind of involve mum or dad as much as possible in the testing process. And, obviously if that works for mum or dad, they may not be able to do that, and I would never say there's an expectation on a parent to kind of be that involved in revision. But if that works for everybody involved, works for the student, works for the parent, that can be a nice way of doing it. And mum or dad in some cases likes to be involved, likes to be helpful, and the kind of social dimension, the accountability, the kind of slightly sort of livening it up, interacting with someone else, particularly if you maybe have a slightly more extroverted personality trait, and just sort of sitting on your own introverted style kind of with your books, it's a little bit difficult to maintain hour after hour. That kind of model of pair testing can work really nicely for people. Or maybe you've got a mate that you do a lot of revision with, etc. That can all work really, really well. It wasn't for me. My preference was very much like, I just want to do it on my own. I want to do my thing. That was kind of my personal style, but people's styles are very different. And if we're doing pair testing, that can be a nice route. So let's say that's something you want to do, or maybe even just like mix in from time to time for a bit of variety. If we want to get the most out of our pair testing, what I want you to remember is the tip, teach, try again routine. And I want to credit Helen Howell for the inspiration for this. The tester, when doing tip, teach, try again, should do the following. So if they can't remember the answer, so this is all advice for what the tester does, the person asking the questions. If your partner can't remember the answer, we encourage them. We give them a tip. We say, come on, you're going to get this. Maybe give them a little hint if they need to. A little hint, a little clue. If you're struggling for a good tip, a fallback option is always you can just give the first letter of the word. So what's kind of the first letter of the keyword? Starts with a T, or even rhymes with. That's a very strong tip. So we've given them a bit of a tip, we've given them some encouragement, and they still can't get it. So at this point, the tester would then teach the right answer. So tell the partner what the answer should be. This sounds totally obvious when I say it, I know, but I have seen times where people are pair testing. I've seen this with a couple of teenagers testing each other, and the person that's asking the questions is just saying, yes, that's right, or no, that's wrong. And if it's wrong, we need to hear the right answer. The whole premise of flashcards is based on the power of retrieval practice. A key element of retrieval practice is we need to hear that right answer if we can't remember it. Retrieval practice works brilliantly and helps us learn hugely, even if we can't remember the right answer. If we get something wrong or misremember, we can learn massively from the recall attempt, but only if we get that feedback, only if we hear what the right answer should have been. So really important to teach them, tell them the right answer. Then finally, we want to try again a little bit later. So we've described how to do that on your own. You might you might dog ear the corner of a flashcard, put a mark on it, put a paperclip on it. Those are all things that your tester could do as well. And again, if it's a really tricky card, you might ask them to do it. Give them, let you practice it again pretty much straight away. Or, otherwise, as I say, put the paperclip on it, dog ear the corner, turn the corner over, and come back to all those cards that you got wrong at the end of the session and give you another round of practice on it. Think about, how you'd coach your tester, your testing partner, to give you the right kind of testing practice. So, things we talked about before. Should they test in one direction only, or do you need to practice it both ways, front to back and back to front? How specific do your answers need to be? Exact word-for-word regurgitation, or just kind of the sense of it? If you're memorizing quotes or, really specific terminology definitions, you might kind of want to aim for fairly word-for-word. But, sometimes I've seen people pair testing, and the person on the person being tested is sometimes getting a little bit frustrated because they've basically kind of got the answer, but the tester is insisting on the exact wording of the card. So, you need to, as the person being tested, give your tester the brief, give the guidance on kind of how specific you need the answer to be, whether there's some latitude for kind of wiggle room of kind of broadly getting the sense of it, or whether it does need to be exact word for word. And then if time is limited relative to the volume of cards you want to test, for example, you're kind of doing some final testing the day before an exam, do you want your testing partner to only test those cards that have proved problematic in the past? So you might hand them a whole stack of cards, some of which have kind of marks or paper clips on or folded corners from previous days of testing where it's proved difficult. You might say to your testing partner, okay, I only want you to test the cards that I've got wrong before. Time's quite limited, so I'm just going to go through as much of the course as possible, just having a final round of practice of the cards I struggle with most. And by the way, while we're talking about things to do the day before an exam, I've got a resource on the Exam Study Expert YouTube channel all about what to do the day before an exam. I know many of you this time of year are in the midst of taking exams, so I thought that was a particularly useful resource to mention. If you're listening to this episode as it comes out, I'll link up that video in the show notes. That's on our open access YouTube channel. So that's a wrap for this episode, and indeed for this course as a whole. I really hope you found some ideas here to take your study strategy using flashcards to the next level. Whether you are brand new to flashcards and have been inspired to take your first steps, or maybe you're an established flashcard user and you've just picked up a tip or trick or two to lift and elevate your game and help you squeeze out some extra efficiency, extra learning out of the time you're putting into your flashcards. Before I close today, let me just take a moment to recap today's big ideas, because we've talked about quite a lot. Number 1, keep your cards in order when doing the testing. Number 2, reattempt tricky cards again straight away. Number 3, if you're using a digital flashcard tool, it's okay to ignore the algorithm. Number 4, realistic recall rehearsal. Consider the mode that you do your practice in, handwriting, digitally, out loud, and be sure to practice at least some times in the modality that you'll be examined in. Number 5, if at first you don't succeed, consider breaking down the material further or using a mnemonic strategy. And number 6, consider if you want to test yourself or whether you want to get a friend or family member involved to test you. Remember, tip, teach, try again if you're getting someone involved to help with the testing. Which of these will you try first? Or maybe it's an idea from a previous instalment in this course. Perhaps you'd like to drop it in the comments. Now a feature I'm really enjoying on Spotify, if you listen to us on Spotify, as well as, of course, on YouTube, if you listen to us there. Both of these platforms make it really easy to leave comments. And I'm really enjoying interacting with you all, hearing your feedback, hearing about what you liked, what you found most helpful, as well as those of you that are asking questions. I'm doing my best to answer those. I hope you're finding some use in that. So if you're listening to, particularly on Spotify, YouTube, please do consider leaving a comment on this or any other episode, letting me know what you thought about it, letting me know what you're going to try. From your perspective, by the way, it's always really helpful to write that intention of, this is my takeaway, this is what I'm going to do. If you've got an idea of something you're going to try, something you're going to implement, actually writing it out in the comments is a really nice little trick to increase the chance that you actually take that good idea and put it into practice. It just helps you remember it, helps you kind of own it out loud, helps increase the chance that you actually act on that good intention. And of course, if you've got a question, something you want clarification on, really happy to answer your questions as best I can. While I'm talking about the wonderful community around the show, if you found this course helpful, as I hope you have, why not consider sharing it with someone who you think would benefit so we can reach and help even more people. It really does make a difference in helping the show found and helps keep us doing what we do. My thanks, as always, to you all for listening. I hope you've really enjoyed this course, found a lot of useful stuff in it. I really do appreciate your support, and I really do look forward to seeing you again very soon, when we'll be taking a little bit of a break from flashcards. It's been quite a detailed, granular few episodes. Hopefully some useful ideas, but I want to give it a little bit of a break and do something a little bit different and a change of scene over the next few weeks. So some good things coming your way. I look forward to seeing you again next week for that. Wishing you every success, as always, with your studies.